Show with Minister Malik Shabazz. Today is July the 2nd, 2018. My name is Baba Kafinse Chike, aka Dr. Chike. This is the Get Up Stand Up Show with Minister Malik Shabazz, and you're watching the Black in a Day in a 313 segment, an Afrocentric perspective on African and African American history and phenomena, when and where it occurs, with a primary focus on Detroit. But of course, we take our investigative news or notes wherever African phenomena may occur. Again, this is the Get Up Stand Up Show with Minister Malik Shabazz, Black in the Day in the 313. And you're viewing us on TV33WHPR.com via the World Wide Web. You can also view us on the Android app, on your mobile devices and telephones, tablets, iPads. And you can download the Android app at the Android Google Play Store, or the Apple app at the Apple App Store. You can also view us via the Roku box, Google TV, and on Channel 91 Comcast in Detroit, and I think on regular television on Channel 33. This is Get Up Stand Up with Minister Malik Shabazz. Today is July the 2nd, 2018, and as usual, and we're glad to be back. We were off for a week last week, and we're back. We're going to try to resume our discussion on black music in the spirit of Black Music Month. Of course, we're into July now, but before we move forward, we want to take a moment of silence to acknowledge, commemorate, venerate, raise the spirit, call on the energy of our African ancestors, and those ancestors, both our collective community and national, international, global African ancestors, but also our family ancestors, our personal ancestors, which are represented by our lineage on both our mother and father's side. So we call on, or we acknowledge, take a moment of silence, for those African ancestors that contributed to the advancement of the cause of African liberation, and who were committed to and lived their lives, in some cases died, to make life better for our people. So we take a moment of silence. For those that have gone before us, that helped pave the way, that gave their lives, lived their lives to make our lives better, we say Asante Sana, Madasi Pa, Ashe, Ashe-O. Thank you very much. And I just want to mention a committed brother who made his transition about a week ago, and that's Brother Gregory Roberts, also known as Sada Kifu. He passed away. I don't have the exact dates of his life and birth, but I just wanted to mention him as a brother who, I think he would have been 68 years old this year. And he had a long, extensive career of public service, and of service particularly to the African people, or people of African descent in this city, and actually globally as well. Of course, he was reared in many ways as a young man in the Shrine of the Black Madonna, where he got a lot of his training. He was an ordained minister, which we call Walimu, which means he was trained in the faith of the Shrine of the Black Madonna, Black Christian nationalism of the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church. He went on to be an advisor to numerous political figures, such as Jennifer Granholm, and to what degree she incorporated his knowledge and wisdom and understanding, I'm not really sure, because she did a lot of things that were not necessarily in the best interest of our people. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, and somebody can call in to correct me on this, I think the first school takeover actually occurred under Jennifer Granholm. If it was not the first school takeover, it was the first emergency manager. And if my information is not accurate, you can correct me on that. I know there's a wide array of people viewing and listening in the television audience, as well as we're trying to get live on Facebook. I'm not sure what's happening with that, but call in. The numbers are on the screen to correct me on that. But I wanted to remember Brother Gregory George Roberts, also known as Walimu Sada Kifu, and people that knew him more affectionately within the constructs of the Pan-African community simply called him Kifu. So I wanted, he was laid to rest today, and I just wanted to lift up his name as we think about and focus on the ancestors for that brief period. Also, the focus today, and I'm a little discombobulated as I was trying to prepare for the show today. I had decided to kind of come back to the conversation on black music, and specifically African American music, which for me is actually African music. But my perspective as a Pan-Africanist, as an educator, a parent, a teacher, is only two types of Africans, and that is either a diasporic African or a continental African. So everything about much of what we do is African. And of course, due to our experiences here and in other places post-enslavement, during the enslavement era and the post-enslavement era, we have, of course, incorporated non-African attitudes, behaviors, ideas, and concepts. So I will talk about African music, but before I get to that, and we're moving towards a specific focus on jazz. Also next week, the plan is to have in studio with us a Detroit legend, and a jazz legend, an internationally known jazz legend, the last living Michigan jazz master, none other than Wendell Harrison. He'll be in studio to talk about the history of jazz, of course, his work and accomplishments as a jazz musician, composer, teacher, jazz educator, jazz activist, as well as the history of jazz in Detroit as well, to keep it in the context of the focus of Black in the Dead at 313. But as I was preparing for the show tonight, and I consume a lot of news. I'm watching the news, various news stations, MSNBC Live, Sirius XM, different progressive channels and all these things. Just, I've kind of got really consumed in this whole phenomena that began with the 2016 election, really leading up to the 2016 election. And not that I have all this great fascination or investment in electoral politics and the political process. One of the things that I learned coming out of the Pan-Africanist movement, and more specifically out of the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church, part of what we ascribed to was the idea that politics was sacred. Politics is sacred. Not meaning the politics that many of us engage in terms of the electoral and political process, but politics, in a very general sense, is about people advocating for their interests. And in this political system that we are either victim to, or subjected to, or in some way, some of us feel we are part of it, is all about access to resources. So politicians are about gaining resources and acquiring those resources and making those, retrieving those resources, benefits, resources for their constituency, for the people that they represent. And I think to a great degree, many of us don't understand that and how the political process works. But I would be foolish to think that none of us really are aware of what has been happening with politics that's really been going on as long as we've been subjected to this country from the era of slavery moving forward. But the particular time we live in now seems to be prime for reversing the perceived advances and accomplishments that African people, i.e. African American people in this country, have made, and others, women to some degree, the LGBTQ community, people with disabilities, brown people, people of color. I don't really like that term. So we're in the process of really seeing things being reversed, or things being set up to be reversed. And what comes to mind as I talk about this particular aspect is the phenomenon now that we're looking at is the idea that Donald J. Trump, or whatever his complete name is, who's the President of the United States, we all know this, is now at a point where he is slated to select another justice on the Supreme Court. And in my short lifetime, over the course of time that I've been alive, I'm too young to have been, I was born after Brown versus Board of Education, which occurred in 1954, which actually reversed Plessy versus Ferguson, which initiated the Jim Crow era, which was probably the heightened era of the civil rights movement. And this began in 1869. And through the efforts of Charles Houston, Thurgood Marshall, and others, they were able to manipulate the legal system, or the institution, the legal system, which is one of the American institutions. They were able to manipulate it, or learn it well enough to manipulate it to end legal segregation legally, technically, and theoretically. Also in my lifetime, the Voters' Rights Act was passed. So we've seen many alleged accomplishments. But also in the short time that I've been in the planet, I'm now seeing these very things reversed. And what it says to me is that the people that would feel as though their best interest was not served with the passage of the Voters' Rights Act, with the passage of Brown versus Board of Education, they have never stopped working a day. In fact, we can take this ongoing struggle for access and control of these institutions as far back at least to the Civil War. And actually before then, and prior to the Civil War, for the most part, the predominant paradigm in this country was straight up, outright racist. White supremacy was the prevailing paradigm. Now, it has not ever ceased to exist, but for some people, the defeat of the South was one of many battles, in a sense, to defeat white supremacy. Some of us at least interpret it that way. There's a brother named Dr. Errol Henderson, who has a book, I can't call the name of the book, and a lot of what I'm talking about is just things that I was thinking about as I was coming into the studio, so I didn't have prepared notes for this. But in his book, he talks about how people of African descent, the formerly enslaved people in this country, used the Civil War as a revolution, in a sense, to end slavery. They were willing to commit their lives and fight in the Civil War with the hope, the desire, and the intention to end slavery. And in fact, the Civil War did result in the end of slavery. And people are probably saying, well, what happened to black in the day in the 313? We always keep it black. So it's still within the context of what we do here on the Get Up Stand Up show. And remember, the show is Get Up Stand Up, which is taken from Bob Marley. Get up, stand up. Get up and do something. Get up and fight. So anyhow, this ongoing struggle and battle by our ancestors, people of African descent, for freedom, which ultimately for many of us equated to access to this society. And immediately following the Civil War, the country goes into the Reconstruction period, which begins in 1865 and lasts to 1876. That's approximately 12 years. And during this short 12-year period, African Americans made more success exponentially in every area of life. The degree that we came to own and develop businesses, business communities, was monumental. The degree that we made pathways to and access into the political institutions of this society, including local governmental offices and political offices, local governmental agencies at every level of government, from city, local, state, and even on the national level. So, as Reconstruction for African people in this country, the formerly enslaved people, was the most successful and shortest period of time of success for African Americans, there was pushback against that, and we have been historically in a struggle. Actually, our struggle for freedom in the context of post-Columbus era, what I call the Columbus era, begins with the Columbian voyages in 1492. 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue. Of course, that's the limerick, the rhyme, or whatever. And that opened up the new world for Western expansion, emergence, and conquest, and also the genocide of indigenous American people and the enslavement and genocide of people of African descent. So this continuum of struggle for freedom, for our the struggle to assert our humanity and have it respected, has been continuous. And I kind of come to this because as I was preparing my few notes to talk about jazz just before the show began, they brought up the young man. His name is Antoine. I can't remember his name. This is a young 17-year-old unarmed man who was killed in Pittsburgh. Now, I looked at his face on the screen and I was reminded of how innocent the young man who was shot in Florida, I can't think of his name right now, but everybody knows who I was talking about, who was walking home with the Skittles and the iced tea. And what I thought about more than anything is how Trayvon Martin, thank you. This has become so normal for us, seeing the faces of young black men that have been killed by the stormtroopers of this country. I'm sorry, I gotta call it like I see it. The young man got out of the car and ran. They shot him for no reason. But this really is not new, because we have been under attack from day one, and actually the attacks on African people didn't begin post 1492, which is the time period we slate as the beginning of the Ma'afa. Those of us that study African history, African American history, know and understand. Thank you, Sister Maya. Those of us that know and understand that African American history and African history is really the same history, and African American history is just an extension of the history of African people who were the first people on the planet that were later taken into the diaspora. So our history has continued, but we have been under attack as far back, those of us that have a holistic interpretation of this history and culture, as far back as the 1700 BC era, when non-Africans attacked ancient Kemet. But I didn't want to go there, but anyhow, I mean, in terms of going back into the history of ancient Africa. So I looked at this young man and I began to think about how we act surprised when these incidents occur, even though to a degree we have grown, there has developed somewhat of a sense of numbness amongst us, because the more you see this happen, the less it seems to enrage you or hurt you. And this is part of the human psyche that seeks to protect us from pain. And I can't help but think about the Rodney King incident. They showed that video so much. When you first saw the video, it would bring you to tears that they would beat this man like this. But after you saw it hundreds of times, a part of who we are physiologically creates a defense mechanism so that we're not, we what is the word? We shield ourselves so that it doesn't hurt us and we become desensitized. And this is just a part of the defense that we need. But I say all this to kind of bring up the idea that many of us believe that we're free. Many of us that believe when our ancestors walked off of the plantation, that was the end of the whole thing. We's free now, master. Right? But part of what didn't get free, really the paradigm just changed from a predominant physical enslavement to now a more secure mental enslavement, and people knew and understood or understand that if you mentally enslave a people, you have them. So we walked off of plantations and we were free in our own minds in terms of the constructs of what freedom meant in the context of how we had lived the prior 246 years. And we bought into the idea that we were now Americans, hence the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, and we now would be treated equal and would have full access to the society just like the people that this society was created for. And in that spirit of liberation, of newness and liberation in the context of and confines of this country, going back to the era of Reconstruction, we had monumental success. We were able to make this system work for us to the degree, and probably to the greatest degree that it ever will. But there was a backlash to that. So there were many people, and many of those people that were the descendants, and so at that time there were still people alive that were the people that lost the Civil War. It was people from that time period that were committed to taking things back to the way they were, to making America great again. And we're still experiencing that backlash today. And I say that to say that these same people have been committed to restoring the society to the way they felt like it should be, or the way that it was. And we see this time and time and time again. And we're at the height of the apex of seeing it now with the current president and the current situation or political scenario in the country. Now, part of what prompted my desire to talk about this, because I still plan to get Jazz in and it may have to wait to next week, is I'm currently involved in a program at one of the local universities. It's a STEM-focused program that's designed to take upcoming 10th graders that are entering, going into their 10th grade year of college, and try to engender them or teach them or gear them towards the STEM-focused careers and subjects. And this particular program, I'm not going to name it or the university, decided they would include an African American Studies elective as part of these science, technology, engineering, math classes, which of course I'm glad to do, because I'm real clear that that's what I do, that's what I've been called to do. That's clear. Thanks to Mommy Monty Humphreys, I was able to help. She helped me to realize that that's what I came here to do. But in trying to prepare the curriculum, a thought occurred to me that a child, somebody going into this in the 9th grade, going to the 15th, into the 10th grade, is either 14 or 15. Or they could be an advanced student, hopefully. In some cases they may be a little behind, but that's the age range. And if you think about a 14 or 15-year-old student, that child, when you think about the United States government, you think about the president to the degree that who the president is may be significant. That's a whole other conversation for another time. If you're 14, Obama has been out of office for almost 2 years, so if you take 2 from 14, that's 12, and that means that 8 from 12, that 14-year-old child has almost only knew Barack Obama as the president. Now, the degree or the effectiveness of Barack Obama and his ability to serve the interests of black people, that's, of course, a conversation for another show as well. But what came up in conversations that we were having was, well, like, well, these were the only presidents that 14 or 15-year-old really can know or have some, be able to articulate some conversation about is Barack Obama and or Donald Trump. But what I also thought about, and just some of the things I've talked about, the history of this struggle for us to have access into this society and to have access to the institutions, they don't know. There's a generation, there's even a generation, there's some people in that generation or even a subsequent generation older than them that have no knowledge of the historical struggle of African people in this countries and countries like this, Paris, France, England, wherever we wound up as a result of the transatlantic slave trade, which created the African diaspora and colonialism. So a lot of these younger generation, 2 generations ago, I'm almost 60 years old, so that would be the equivalent of 3 generations, 2 generations ago, or less, have very little knowledge about the struggles that created an environment for them to exist in where they can think, racism, what is that? I don't know that. What is segregation? I don't know that, but what they're seeing repeatedly is African people under attack on a whole another level. And a lot of the reason why they see this is because of the technology of cell phones, the internet, and social media. But as I thought about this, and I thought about creating a curriculum and lesson plans and a lesson for a 5-week class, part of what came to my mind, and this is not a new idea for me, and many of us know this, we have systematically been under attack. Many of us think we walked off of the plantations in 1865, and we've been free since. Historically, when slavery ended, we went into Reconstruction era, which was real brief, a very brief period of time, and massive African American success. And there was massive pushback. The emergence of groups like the Ku Klux Klan, the Knights of the White Camille, emerged to protect their institutions, their way of life, and to try to ensure that we were relegated to our place, the place that was created for us when we were brought here as not second-class citizens, but something less than that. So we get 1865, black people are free. Reconstruction, 1865 to 1876. Shortly after slavery ends, we get something called sharecropping, which is a new form of slavery. And we get a more intense form of it called convict leasing. Sharecropping, and there's evidence, historical documentation, that there were sharecropping situations that lasted well into the 1960s. So as I prepare this curriculum, I've actually looked at and the documentary 13th helps to bring this out as well, because what the sister does in 13th, it shows how there's been this historical systematic oppression going on to relegate people of African descent in this country to a lesser place, and really it never ended. So it didn't end with slavery. We had a short reprieve during Reconstruction, and we get pushed back. We get the emergence of all these white groups doing sharecropping. You still have black people controlled and relegated to oppressive labor situations. All we had coming off of plantations, except for the few free blacks that have always been here, was our labor to trade for access to the land to be able to eke out an existence for ourselves and hopefully make a way of life. Reconstruction ends. Of course, a lot of the success of African Americans in this country was due to the fact that to some degree, the Republicans, who were the people that were theoretically on the side of black people, through radical reconstruction, used the various institutions and agencies that were part of the government, which they controlled at the time, to help protect black people to some degree. And we were able to succeed. But there was massive, major pushback, the rise of the Klan, the Knights of the White Camille, and changing the shifts in government. So we were sold out in what was called the Hayes-Tilton sellout in 1876. So from 1876, you get this reforming and reemergence of attitudes, ideas, and opinions, and politicians from the South who were holdovers from the Confederacy. Then we get to 1896. Now sharecropping is still going on, so we have this economic labor system that's designed to keep our ancestors suppressed and oppressed, but we get 1896, we get the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, which is almost like a travel ban. I was listening to a sister named Ruby Sales on an interview just a couple of days ago, and she was actually saying that black people have always been under a travel ban. The most immediate evidence we have of it contemporarily is the many instances. This is just one aspect of this, where white people find black people in spaces that they've questioned whether or not they are valid or should have the validity to be there, whether it's Starbucks, asleep on a dorm room common area, moving stuff out of Airbnb, or having a peaceful ceremony in Belle Isle. White people feel like, oh, you're not supposed to be here, so I'm going to call the stormtroopers and I'm going to start calling them that. The occupying force. So that, and Ruby Sales kind of articulated this in a way to say that's a travel ban, similar to the sense that Jim Crow was a travel ban. So we have these spaces that you do not have access to. You cannot use the restroom here. You cannot eat here. You cannot go to this school. That's very much like a travel ban. That's very much like how apartheid operated. And that system lasted, I forget the exact amount of years, from 1896 to 1954. And as we have historically done, as long as we've been here, we have always resisted. So great legal minds, Charles Houston, who was the teacher of Thurgood Marshall at Howard University. These brothers fought and worked a number of cases to develop precedent and help to work their way up to argue effectively and win Brown versus Board of Education. And to a large degree, it really did not, it legally ended segregation. But the reality is you cannot legislate or litigate a people's morality and their views, because as we see, people are working around this every day. People have voted against continuing the Voters' Rights Act. All of these various entities, Brown versus Board of Education, Voters' Rights Act, different things like this were perceived victories, and I guess in some way they were stepping stones for us towards victory, but a lot of these things are subject to be reversed and turned around. Now, I'm not surprised nor amazed, because I feel like these people are doing what they feel like they're supposed to do. And I have said this before and I'll say it again, I consider myself and our people to be subjects of America, and we are the descendants of prisoners of war. Those Africans that were captured and enslaved here are the equivalent of prisoners of war. We're the descendants of such. And until we know, understand, and operate in terms of truly understanding our position in this country, and I hope somebody's watching that wants to challenge this, but if we were truly equivalent, first of all, you can't make me equal. You don't determine what my perception of who I am or what I am. You have access to the institutions, you control the institutions, so you are able to impact my life in negative ways, but that doesn't make me less than. That's of course a whole nother conversation. But going back to the institutions, when we came here, we did not control any institutions. And this is a major argument between culture nationalists, black nationalists, political black nationalists, that some people say land is the basis of power. Other people will argue that institutions are the basis of power. I stand on the side that institutions are the basis of power. And the reason I say that is if you have land and you don't have the institutions necessary to control the land, to protect the land, to defend the land, to cultivate the land, and someone comes along that has better, stronger institutions, they can take your land. So power resides in institutions. And throughout the time that we've been here, from the enslavement era, going into the Jim Crow era, going into the sharecropping era, moving to the era of convict leasing, into Jim Crow in 1896, which was turned around in 1954. From 1954, which is the height era of civil rights, you see us exercising civil disobedience, but the civil rights movement was predicated and argued from the perspective that based on the Constitution, the rights that we're granted by the Constitution as presumed citizens, you are denying me access. So we're getting pushed back against that now. Shortly after just, I don't know, 28 short years, I'm not a math teacher, so my math might be slightly off. By the time we get to 1968, now from 54 going to the 60s, we go through phases of the civil rights movement, from civil rights to the Black Power movement. I'm going to take a break here. Good evening, caller. Welcome to the Get Up Stand Up Show. Could you tell us your name and offer a quick comment or question?
This is Minister Terrell Collins. You were mentioning the Constitution, but I want to prefix this by saying my belief is that we are the children of Israel, as the Bible states in the book of Exodus in the Bible. And when this country was founded, it was founded based only for the occasion. It did not consist of us when they told us I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And all men are created equal. That was not for us, because our people, our ancestors were enslaved. So then they had to start changing things. As we evolved mentally and spiritually as a nation, they had to start taking the rules, taking that, or whatever you want to call it. Where we are now, as I see it, is we are in a spiritual battle, as laid out in the Bible, where God says, my people that are called by my name will humble themselves and turn from their wicked ways. I will heal the land. We are being asked to return to the Creator. We are the original creation, created in spirit, because God is spirit, and He created man in His image of spirit.
Oh.
We are being taken away from spirit by this system. This system is connecting us to the invisible, which is the spirit realm.
Okay, Miss.
That's prevent us from going into the spirit within us.
Miss, you need to wrap it up real quick. We're down to about 3 minutes, so I appreciate your comment.
Wrap it up. We must return to God. Keep growing spiritually. We
Oh.
got to grow spiritually and take the government up onto the shoulders of Jesus Christ by having the Christ in us.
All right. Thank you.
Have a blessing.
You too. Thanks. And I respect your perspective. I kind of forgot where I was. I think we got about 3 minutes left? Got about 3 minutes left. So anyhow, where I'm going with this, we have been systematically locked into a system and controlled by the institutions. Now, where I was going to from the era of Jim Crow, we get in the civil rights era where we get a lot of pushback, but we're getting pushed back against that. 1968, Richard Nixon runs on a plank platform called Law and Order, and Donald Trump tried to bring it back, but the Law and Order platform was pushed back against the civil disobedience and all of the outrage and the various efforts that African Americans made during the civil rights era. So for people, white folks watching this on TV and middle class American everywhere, it's like, oh, the black people are out of control and they're breaking the law. So Nixon runs on the Law and Order platform, and this begins the era of mass incarceration, which formally begins in 1968. This is where I place it, and this is kind of argued in the documentary 13th, and we're still in that era of mass incarceration. But what has happened during that time, we've seen our brothers and sisters being locked up at a heightened rate, and it is through the control of the institutions, law enforcement, the judicial system, the legislative branch of government, the judicial branch of government, the executive branch of government, and now, because it's been a struggle, kind of back and forth for that as long as our ancestors have been in this country. It was less of an issue for us directly during slavery because we were relegated to one place. We didn't even have the prospect of access to the institutions. Once we came off a plantation and there was the premise that we would be citizens, that gave us at least some level of access, and we began to work the system to try to serve our interests. That's being reversed now, and just in the from 68 moving forward, there has been historical efforts to intensify the control of the institutions. One of the ways they did it was through the prison system, and even now the shift we had when Obama was in office, there was a movement to try to move away or ease the mass incarceration. We know when Sessions came in and Trump came in, they said, no, we prosecute to the highest extent of the law. But even conservatives have begun to see that the cost of incarcerating African Americans and brown people was getting too excessive. So they devised a new trend, which was community confinement and putting more people on tethers. It's all laid out in the video, but when you connect these various dots, you can see clearly that we have been incarcerated on some level since we've been here. And I know somebody's going to say, oh, that young man is losing his mind. He thinks he's enslaved. No, I'm not enslaved because you can't enslave this. You can shackle my body. You can't enslave my spirit. And the historical evidence is that Africans have rebelled on every level. Even Nelson Mandela is evidence. And we could get into the whole thing about him being president and all that, but he retained a spirit of rebellion. Just real quick, Malik Shabazz, thanks for pointing out that England took over the schools in 1999. Super empowered CEO and state-imposed school board, Granholm, which I said, thanks for clearing me up, brought in the emergency manager. And Maya Atza, thanks for watching. Hopefully you'll tune in again. We are out of time. It's actually 11:59. Thank you for viewing. And tonight's show, I was supposed to talk about jazz. Next week, Wendell Harris will be in here. I'll talk about jazz, give an overview of it, and then have him come talk about jazz, the historical significance of jazz and black people of jazz in Detroit. You've been viewing the the Get Up Stand Up show with Minister Malik Shabazz. This is the Black in the Day and the 313 segment, which airs every Monday night from 11 p.m. till 12 a.m. the next morning. Thank you for viewing. Stay tuned, turn on. We also broadcast live via Facebook. Thank you, and thank you again for continuing to watch us and support us. And always, we close with the words of our saint, our African saint, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who said, "Up, you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will."